Hello, everybody. It's Fernando Labastida once again in another episode of Martechify. Just to remind you, Martechify is a connected learning community where marketing professionals can share ideas, best practices, and success stories to help stay current in today's really fast changing technology environment. I'm honored to have David Sim as our guest today. He is the VP and Head of Growth Marketing and Operations at Rethink First, and he's had several high-level positions of marketing from Altium and Marketech and BMC Software. And he started life as process engineer at Teradyne. But welcome, David. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. How cold? You're up in Maryland, so how cold is it right now?
Oh, it's not bad. We had a high of 50 degrees today, so it's been nice.
Okay, good. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a rundown of your career trajectory, especially looking at how you got your career started as a process engineer at Teradyne, and then that kind of interesting transition from engineer to marketing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful trip down amnesia lane. It's a great, look back at kind of, we're taught in engineering school that engineers are God's gift to society, and then you realize quickly when you get into the real world that we are the most hated human beings on earth because we change everything. And, as everybody's aware, humans are 98% of the time against change in any way, shape, or form, unless they're part of making that decision making, right? So you learn a lot through that process. But for me, I worked in semiconductors, and then from there, I ended up working for a company called Mead Westvaco. And,
Oh yeah,
people
flavor.
will know them as Mead, as Five Star Notebooks, envelope manufacturing. Well, I constantly worked in envelope manufacturing.
Uh-huh.
And, direct mail was huge. Back in late 90s, we were still doing, like, one of our clients was MBNA Bank. We did 14 million envelopes per quarter for one client. So you
Right.
can imagine all the other different types of clients that we had. Well, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm one of the few marketers who probably have passed the postal exam. And so that
Really?
being said, well, I joke around a lot and I tell people that it was right around the time when George Costanza's wife on Seinfeld died from licking too many envelopes. And
Oh, I remember that episode well.
but despite that, it was right around the same time that we were looking at. I was looking at digital emails, and after, it was a natural progression. By no means is there anything wrong with envelopes, and you can obviously lick them. But it was the onslaught of back in 2006, 2007. Can spam compliance had come out in 2003. People, Google was still naming their updates for their search algorithms. And during that time, there was a lot of spam. And I kind of got my start in marketing through digital digital spams. We had a local email client scrubbing all night long, and I would send out 500,000 emails a day. Um,
Wow.
So it was an era when we had email clients hosting, and then we had separate SMTP server relays. And so, like, the engineering mind in me, it was awesome, right?
Uh-huh.
You could now do this in volumes of scale, measure it, see throughput, right? In an engineering sense, we call it input, throughput, and output. In marketing sense, we call that delivery,
Right.
right? Click through rates, and then we call that conversion. So it's just a matter of how you take the similar terms and apply it in a different sense. So
Wow. So you kind of have a backdoor entrance to marketing through helping you all get through the spam filters as an engineer, which is actually critical, to be able to get to people's inboxes and, increase response rates, increase viewership, open rates, etc. Yeah. So go on. I interrupted you.
No, I mean, so for me, my trajectory in terms of demand generation kind of started there. Um, then you don't stop, right?
Mhm.
It's you're inquisitive, or for me, it was inquiring minds wanting to know like what happens after that, and then, well, how do you get that to be better? How do you get your open rates to be above 20%? What is the best practice? And then somewhere along the line, you start to get into more and more. From there, I did field marketing. I did quite a bit of digital marketing, pay per click when Google didn't have frivolous click counts back then. They didn't have call out extensions and site links. Um, I stayed up all night long because I blew through 3 grand, which was supposed to be a month worth of my AdWords, but I blew through that in one night because of the frivolous click counts that Google didn't have measures.
Right.
Now it's limited to 2 or 3, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Matching criteria keywords type matching was limited to like 4 different types back then. It was a very different time, right?
Yeah.
And so as you're gamifying a bigger, better mousetrap, as
Mhm.
all of us do in Martech and marketing, right? How do you do that in a way that is scalable, efficient, and how do you do that in a measurable way that is very data driven to drive growth? And so that was a lot of the stuff that we were tackling. Um, it sounds weird to say it, but that was 19, 18 years ago, right?
Gee. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And so did you take that? I'm sure that you took that mentality of data-driven growth to where you are today, right?
I have. So from there, I worked on demand generation, looking at the advancements that we've seen in Martech over the years. Just to give you a an idea, I think the studies came out where about a year ago, right, or so, they did an analysis and they said, how many Martech tools are out there?
Hmm.
And it's a little over 7,000, right? And when you compare that to where it was about 10, 11 years ago, it was only 400. And so just to give you an idea, we went from 400 Martech tools to over 7,000 in a short span of about 10 years. And there's there's only so many ways that you can punch. There's only so many ways you can kick. What you get to the point is there's a lot of overlapping tools that do similar, maybe analogous things, and they look very similar.
Right.
Like for example, if somebody asked, "What are some of the best ABM tools out there?" I think clearly you can count on one hand who they are, right? And you're starting to look at Sixth Sense, Demand Base, Enrich, Terminus, right?
Bombora.
Bombora in terms of intent engines and signals. Um, and there's newer ones that are offsetting that with the help of AI.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like, right? It's same thing for like chatbots or same thing for marketing automation platforms, right? Or even
Yeah.
for CRM.
Yeah.
We know who the best in class are. Now the question is, do they have different price offerings based on which part of the industry you are, right? Are you a startup? Are you SMB? Are you mid market? Or are you an enterprise client? And most of them do. It's just a matter of what that package needs to look like. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of, startup, SMB, mid market, and enterprise throughout my career. So,
Yeah. 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 And it's so funny what you mentioned about the Martech, the just the explosive number of Martech tools that have come on the market. There's a new one coming every day on AppSumo and Product Hunt and etc. So
mhm.
it's overwhelming. So
Yeah.
so great. So tell me a little bit about your current role. I believe you're at a company called Rethink First, right? Tell me a little bit about the software and about the market, and what is your approach to marketing at your current company? Like, how do you, what's your marketing philosophy, and how do you apply that to where you are right now?
So the transition for me from engineering to marketing was one that was exciting, right? For me, because as I graduated grad school, I looked around and I said, well, this is interesting, right? Because for engineers, all numerical values are finite, right? It's 1 plus 1 always equals 2. And if it doesn't equal 2, then you screwed up somewhere. Um, but marketing has a very unique perspective on that, which is that 1 plus 1 equals 1 sometimes, and 1 plus 1 sometimes equals 3, right? We have names for that. We call that a strategic giving, where we call that, advocacy on the other side of that, right? And all of a sudden, a client comes over that you didn't expect, comes up, and then gives another affirmation, and you have another additional client as a result of that.
Right.
Those are the different types of variables that interested me so much into marketing.
Hmm.
Well, what's beauty of Rethink First and the type of software that we sell, and I predominantly my background is geared towards e-commerce, SaaS, um, and software industry. Whether it's IT, health tech, and so forth, um, or ed tech. And this for Rethink First, they specialize in health tech, and it is one of the few companies out there. Rethink First has been on the Fortune 1000's top growing companies for the past 6 years. It is phenomenal. They specialize in neurodiversity,
Hmm.
right? Which is people who have behavioral health, people who have mental wellness, mental health, as well as um, autism spectrum and those types of things. Well, we
Right.
have three different segments that we cater to. We cater to the education sector. We also cater to Fortune 100 companies, of which about 30 to 33% of the Fortune 100 companies are our clients. And we cater to the benefits segment there. And then the third segment really for us is BCBAs, behavioral board certified behavioral analysts who are running practices. They need, in this modern day and age, they they need a good system that allows to facilitate communications with their clients, with patients, and then how they do the billing and processing, right? So this is exactly what we cater to. The mission is absolutely stellar. It is beautiful. It is about the company and the people that we help. So.
Yeah, I subscribe to that mission too as a father of a son who's neurodivergent. You know,
Mhm.
he's on the autism spectrum, you know, among other things. So I applaud what you all are doing over there.
Great.
So you have these three constituents. You have education, you have behavioral health professionals, and then you have Fortune 1000 companies. Those are like three different ICPs, you know. So how do you market to them, and
Mhm.
how have you designed your Martech stack to handle
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. So, yes, the ICPs are different, but there's a way that they merge together, right?
Mhm.
Because the value of what you bring to the table from a product-led selling growth, you're still selling to a value proposition that appeals to everybody who's looking for that type of thing. The
Yeah.
value proposition for practitioners of behavioral health is going to be more of how do I make my business worthwhile, but communicate that value. And so you look for essentially the same thing that every single marketer does, which is look for congregation points of where these people and your ICPs are fluctuating.
Hmm.
Back in the day, Google AdWords or Google Ads used to call them affinity groups, right? You're an engineer and then you like home and garden. You're an engineer but you like cats,
Right.
and what percentage of that do you blend? It's very similar, right? You're taking tech stacks, you're aggregating the data that you can get off of either second party, third party cookies, or you can do it off of intent data, intent signals, and then you merge them into your first party data. And then from that first party data, how do you attract that behavioral signals that are ideal to modify towards your ideal candidate profile that leads to your marketing qualified lead to so forth. And we're continuously fine tuning, like every organization that is out there. We're
Mhm.
always fine tuning because maybe that was good, but we like this flavor a little bit better. We like that bucket a little bit better. I think everybody should be always fine tuning kind of what works for them. Right.
Right. Right.
So,
And so how are you dividing your marketing efforts and dollars? But I would say more efforts because I think with organic, it's not so much dollars, but uh, human hours. But how are you dividing your marketing between paid and organic, like content marketing, social media marketing, etc., and events, etc.?
yeah. And for us, I think what we found is that it varies and it varies dependent on each of the business units and where their focuses are.
Mm-hmm.
There's like within any organization, there are going to be places where you have to pay to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I think Seth Godin kind of said it best when he said to not stick out in a crowded marketplace is the death of your business, right? So
You
that's
mentioned,
kind of the way that we look at it. Yeah.
yeah,
And so we're looking at it from the perspective there are certain places that you're going to have to play, right? And certain places that you try to look for newer methods of attracting clients, whether it's from content syndication, whether it's attending other events, whether you do events in a different format where you offer continuing education units, where you have early adopters, people who are looking to graduate, right? Startup mentalities. They're all forms and communities. I can't really say that it's any one,
right,
right? I think it's a diversified approach, but the intricacies of that is when you truly get to an integrated marketing approach,
right.
right? And you
And
have that data that allows you to say who did what, when, where, and with what or how, right?
right,
If you answer that question and you can map that out in a chronological time order, at some point, now you have defined your buyer's journey. And within that buyer's journey, from a data perspective, now you can say, well, we know these things are going to be primarily more top of funnel. We know these things are going to be more middle of the funnel. These interactions and things that people consume or interact with the business or marketing or sales are going to have these inflection points along that buyer's journey that allows you to get to, well, do we need more of that type of content? Do we need more of that type of posting? Do we need more of that in terms of digital marketing, social media, and various things? Where now you no longer have to look at it from the perspective of a multi-touch attribution, but you get to look at it from all touch attribution. And then you get to look at it from, well, if it's all touch attribution, what if you can score that?
right,
Then it's a score-based all-touch attribution model that you can do off of primary data sources.
right,
And then any of those that have gone into opportunity and close one and further down the progression, imagine you already know what those characteristics look like.
right.
And if you pin the other data on top of those, then you actually have a heat map.
Okay. So I assume you're doing this through some kind of a CDP, uh,
So
where, yeah,
yeah,
mhm,
and so sorry to cut you off. The beauty of a CDP really is you can go out and buy one, right?
yeah,
But will it truly encompass what I just said? Or can you do this in terms of various different data points? And can you splice this together utilizing, for me, I'm partial to Power BI, right? It's not because I code in DAX, it's just because, the amount of sheer point of volume of data that we're dealing with.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, within SQL table structures, you could get to this and then think about the ramifications of that, right? From an engineering perspective, you start to look at it from Python, and then you go, well, great. And there's a concept within Python called confusion matrices,
Hmm.
right? Which talks about your true positives, your true negatives, your false positives and false negatives. And
Right.
if you can statistically model that out, how powerful would that be, right?
Wow. Very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you build your own CDP? Or-
So I have in the past.
Yes. Okay.
So with a lot of help with IT.
Right.
And it took a while.
Hmm.
And I've built it in various places throughout my career.
Hmm.
Um, CDP was not a huge thing back in 2016, 20, even then. I think it was predominantly for most, bigger companies that had the ability to look at this. I mean, Nielsen is some of the top in terms of like multi-touch attribution modeling, right?
Yeah.
And then people are looking at, well, is it first touch, last touch? Is it linear or is it a U shape, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to get into that. But at the crux of all this, it's, you know, in 2012, we were talking about big data. And then we used to joke around and said, at some point, we're going to be calling it huge data, right? Because it's no longer just big, it's going to be huge.
Right.
Um, it is astronomical the amount of data that I think we now as marketers see.
Right.
And we have biases, we have performance data, we have behavioral, we have a lot of information at our fingertips that looks at like what did somebody do when they got to our website, right?
Right.
And what did they look at? What is the progression? How long did they stay? What was the session? What was the scroll depth? And at some point, some of that just becomes noise.
Yeah.
And you have to make a decision as to, well, that's important for me,
Mhm.
right? And that's not important for me. But then you start to look at, well, what is important for the board? What is it important for your executive leadership team and others who are saying, well, what data do I want really? Right. And so that's where it becomes marketing has to attach itself to the business priorities and then has to look and communicate so that we're all using the data centric model.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and so that this got me thinking about AI and
Yeah.
agents, et cetera, because with those huge amounts of data, there's only so much that actual humans can do. And so I'm wondering if you're starting to play with, AI bots or agentic
Yeah.
orchestrations or anything within your marketing to handle all that data or other areas as well.
So for me, I think everybody, all digital marketers and Martech people are cringing right now, right? I mean, like Google wants to do away with third party data, right? So,
Right.
well, what does that mean? Well, then how do we get more to second party and first party data? What data is relevant? What data do we get? What data do we not have?
Mhm.
And then what does that mean in terms of the modern technology, which is AI, which is, but how much of my AI is really open? How much of my AI is in a closed segment? Um, you know, how much of it is RAG? What does my RAG look like? Which is the retrieval augmented generation
And,
capabilities that an AI or
and that's where an AI can actually go out into the open web and retrieve information that's not already in its model, right?
It could, but it
Yeah.
also, the question is also, how do you feed the RAG for you, right?
Yes. There
And
you go.
that normally would be like PDF uploads, or you're confined, is it a closed LLM model that you're using? These are all things that I think myself and my team have been asking. We're starting to play in a couple pilots with some friendly folks who are starting alpha testing, right?
Right.
Which is beautiful. And I'll be honest, I'm not going to name who they are, but there's the capability of starting to look at, like, well, what does this look like if we start to do AI generated emails within pipeline? Like, what does this look like if we started do, like, so you're doing one-off emails that basically are AI generated within confines and guardrails. So
Mhm.
in other words, you're not quoting from an AI, you're still trying to engage people, or people that you haven't engaged in a while,
Mhm.
but bring them back into the loop. Um,
Right.
I mean, it becomes a nurture sequence that is beautiful.
Mhm.
The other capabilities might be an AI based chatbot. And well, how far can an AI based chatbot take you? Can it schedule phone calls and collect some data and then give some feedback based off of your level one, level two, level three title tags on your web protocols and your web headings, along with your blog and your PDF, which all feeds into your RAG,
Yeah.
right? And then how do you feed that back into the audience and the world? What guardrails can you set up? Now imagine this. If you have an AI chatbot that brings in contacts, schedules them, and then you have the ability to turn that and say, well, what does this look like for synthetic focus groups?
Huh. Synthetic.
AI driven synthetic focus groups that take these personas and profiles, right, of a TAM, and then it has the ability to be data driven testing of your ICP.
And so the thing is this: how accurate would a synthetic focus group actually be? I mean, because if you have a live person focus group, each one has their own quirks, their own
Well,
personalities, their own likes, dislikes, fears, desires, longings, etc. And how do you kind of infuse a synthetic person or a synthetic focus group
yeah.
with these variations in human in humanity,
So what if we can articulate that into algorithmic behavioral patterns,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And so then what if it's not 100? What if you take data of these personas for 1,000 and you build them in? But the problem with most focus groups is that they become biased the moment, and they become tainted the moment that you ask them one question. That secondary question is no longer valid as the primary question.
Yeah.
So now imagine, then you need to go find another set of 100 people to ask that same secondary question instead of that first initial.
Hmm.
Then you don't have the ability to do this in volumes of scale, right?
Right.
But I think now I'm some of this is conjecture, right? Because I know the company that we're trying to work with in terms of an alpha, but at the same time, like, but what does that look like as you start to scale that? What does it mean? We're still at beginning stages of it. I think conceptually it's fascinating,
Yeah.
but have we done it fully? Not yet, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is where we're headed. You look at Martech, and people are there, and rightfully so. They should all be worried as to, well, what does intellectual property look like? How much of my data will be open to the public versus it being closed? Can we have it in a closed loop? Absolutely. These are all valid concerns. But at the same time, if you can control those aspects of that, and that AI gives you faster data processing at scale and with a quicker turnaround, Like most of us who've run businesses calculate effectivity in terms of FTE hours.
Yeah.
What would this be like, right?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like as though the world is your oyster then if you can deploy that on a massive scale, you know?
I think it can. It's, it is an interesting process. I think Martech is in for a revolutionizing of that, right? Imagine the average chatbot that somebody deploys might take 30, 60, 90 days to figure out all the sequences of, well, if they ask this question, this is what you want to answer. These are the spam or canned responses that you want to have for canned questions. And so you drive that trajectory. But what if your ability to learn from questions that are being asked and then you modify that response? But imagine it doesn't take you 30, 60, 90 days to get up and running. What if you could do that off of all the data you feed and the AI can crawl your back end and AI can crawl all your blogs that you have, your hundreds of pages, and then it can deliver a response and you can execute that chatbot in less than 12 hours.
And that would be phenomenal because you're going from how many did you say 3 to 9 months? What was
Yeah,
the
I
huge
would say it would be on average 30 to 90 days, right?
so
So
30 to 90
it's
days.
about,
So, a month to a quarter, you reduce that down to 12 hours. I mean, that's orders of magnitude. That gives you uh,
Mhm.
the speed that companies are looking for, and so like,
Yep.
uh, you know, I don't know how large Rethink First is. Are you all more like a mid-market company?
We're
Um,
about a mid-market company. We're about 500 employees globally, right? We serve the global market,
yeah.
but predominantly we're headquartered out of North America. So,
Got it. So, a company that's already starting to get to that size is starting to have some certain, amount of mass that
yeah,
makes it a little bit more difficult to move as with the same agility as a startup company. But with what you're talking about, it allows you to instantly have this agility and even larger companies, even,
yeah,
enterprise companies to have the agility that a startup can normally
right.
have with those time frames that you're talking about.
And I think that's the true power of where we go with Martech, right? I mean, I had this conversation with somebody the other day where I said I truly believe that the age of 50, 60, hundreds of marketers is going away, unfortunately, right? Instead, what you need is a a team of scrappy people who can actually look at maybe what I don't know what that number is, but maybe it's only 10 tools, right? Like every company has a CRM,
Hmm.
but every marketing team now has a marketing automation platform. The question is, does that marketing automation platform does they all do similar things, right? They have a landing page, list augmentation, they have UTM code structures, event scheduling, social media planning, possibly.
Yeah,
Or then people go out and buy a social media tool, right?
right.
That does auto scheduling of all of those. So that automatically is three tools right there. And then you say, well, do you have email verification checks and those processes? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you have a project management tool like Jira or something else. Maybe you're in an agile methodology. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're actually doing it through, Monday, Asana, or Microsoft Project. And then you have a Kanban board on top of that, right?
Hmm.
It's I mean, they all do similar things. It's just a matter of what are you? Are you a Google shop? Are you a Microsoft shop? Right? They all kind of integrate into the spectrum of things that people are now becoming inundated with in terms of the natural way of doing business. And then you incorporate that with, well, what other tools do you need? An event management tool? Are you going to use something that's archaic with the 90s code, or you want something newer that can handle the scalability.
Right.
And then you incorporate customer success tools, and then you incorporate SMTPs and email relays for your product from a software perspective. Well, I mean, I just named off probably 7 or 8 tools right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's all you really, is it all you really need, right?
Maybe a
And
design
then,
tool, for
yeah,
you popping off graphics or video
yeah,
editing tool, etc.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you start to get into a DAM. And if you have a DAM that you need, digital asset management tool followed by landing pages, and then maybe your sales team. But like truly, what I just named off is only for marketing,
Yeah.
right? And then you incorporate customer success and you incorporate sales tools. Then at some point, you're going to need a data hygiene tool, and there's quite a bit out there. But at what point do you understand whether or not that's, you have Hoover's, DMB, you have Zoom Info, Revenue Base, Cognism. There's a lot out there, but like, which of them have the best data decay, right? Or I should say, worst data decay.
Worst data.
In
Yeah.
other words, so like the one that you want to go with has to make sense for you, and the price point has to be right for you. And having come from startup world to mid market to enterprise, like it was weird because enterprise, the magic price for enterprise for every Martech tool seemed to be above 100,000, right? But the
Automatically, when
beauty,
you're an enterprise company, they're quoting you 100,000, right?
oh yeah, it's automatic. It's like, oh, that'll be 100,000, right?
Yeah.
And but like it's funny because even when I was in mid market, right, purchasing these tools, that was 20 grand, and theoretically, even at the volume of which what you're purchasing, and in enterprise, yes, we might have more records and we might have more volume. And let's say that volume is 3-4 times what it was in the mid market, but then that would put me at 80,000 for a $20,000 tool at 4 times more. Why is it automatically 100,000,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Or for that matter, like if I went and bought a TV, um, does it really matter if I'm an enterprise client or a mid-market client? Like a 55-inch TV is going to be a 55-inch TV no matter what. So if I'm buying the usage of a software, does it really always need to be dependent on the volume, right? Or that bandwidth? Or is it just what I need that software to do? Right?
Yeah. 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 Exactly. I totally understand. In fact, I think I was talking to another guest a few months back who talked about the fact that, he's seeing a trend where now enterprises are going to be buying mid-market tools and where the implementation time is going to be cut down from 90 days to like maybe a week, right?
Right.
Just because there's lower tolerance from the CFO for long drawn out, implementations, high prices like those, that magic $100,000 mark, et cetera. So fascinating stuff. And so, you know what, you also kind of triggered another couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. And that
Yeah.
is what does your Martech stack look like? And, what's the size of your marketing team?
So the beauty of the marketing team at Rethink, we're small but feisty, nimble bunch. We're only about 10 or 11 strong, right?
Hmm.
Um, and we're getting a lot of things done, right?
That's fantastic.
That being said, at other companies like BMC, my team alone was 30, right? And so so when you go from that to this, and or versus um at Altium, I think my team alone was maybe 14, right?
Yeah.
But the marketing teams in general, it depends on the breadth that you cover as
Hmm.
well. I think automation plays a key role in a lot of the things that we do. In terms of Martech, I mean, like BMC, I had oversight and influence over 87 Martech tools. Of those, I think 56 are core to marketing,
Right.
right? And so, that's huge. And
Right.
and when you start to look at all those integrations, APIs, what are you using to get everything connected? How does that data and the objects and properties within the data structures map? Are you going? I mean, back in the day, everybody was all about star schema in terms of data structure. And then somewhere along the line, we hear this name all the time, which is called Snowflake. Everybody's moved on to this star schema to a Snowflake data structure. And we
Right.
know that you know, my engineering mind would say, well, that reminds me a lot of stoichiometry, right? You're
Mhm.
going from liquid to mass to molecular weights. But it's similar when you start to combine all these things, right? The properties that you have, first name, last name, email, everything is now predicated off of email.
Mhm.
But then you start to look at things and you go, well, is email the right thing?
Yeah.
And then you start to say, well, what if somebody had three different emails? Like, I don't know about you, but I have four email addresses, right?
Yeah.
Whether
Me
it's,
too. I think I have
right?
four. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going from like maybe Hotmail back in the day to AOL, maybe some. And some people might have Yahoo, Gmail is now kind of a given.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have your work emails and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
From a business perspective, most of us who deal in B2B, we want your work email address.
Right.
And then how do you map the behavior and what people have consumed or how they triggered your website by anonymous visits through their personal email address? Do you map that through IP lookups? Do you map that to website fingerprinting? How can you do that based off of these things? And how do you have primary, secondary, tertiary email mapping?
Mhm.
And then do you do it off of a UID or globally accepted UIDs? The data structure is phenomenal, right? It's just if you can understand that segment of it from a Martech standpoint, you can unify whatever else you want.
Well, that's and this is what you're is this where you're at right now, or is this what you're working towards?
So there are parts of this that I have built at different companies. There are
Hmm.
parts of this that I at Rethink we are not there. we're
Right.
still we're still there, and I don't know how many people out there are there. I'll
Hmm.
be honest, right?
Yeah.
I don't know any scalable solution from a CRM that allows you to do primary, secondary, tertiary email mapping based off of website fingerprinting to a UID, right?
Right.
I think these are all concepts that, I mean, I've had conversations with colleagues within the industry who said, well, we should look at phone numbers and cell phone numbers instead. What a great idea, right? Like you look at uniqueness of people's identification and usually is email or cell phone number. You can't have two of the same number,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think it is fascinating as to where people are heading. I think there's tremendous amount of arbitrage opportunity that is still out there for you to innovate. And I think Martech has come a long way from, when I got started, when I was a spammer.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you also said that kind of triggered another question was when you said that when you were at BMC, you had like 87 Martech tools, 56 of which were focused on marketing. I mean, that sounds like as though there was a lot of technical debt there. So how do you deal with something like that?
With a technical debt, I think what happens is there's a lot of companies and a lot of teams, and sometimes you can't control that, right?
Mhm.
They need this for to be that. They need this to be that, right? They need a tool that can communicate with customers at a certain point, and you need to be able to scale those, or you need it for employee advocacy, or you need it for executive briefings, and some of those tools you kind of we've those of us who've been in corporate America, you make those deals to offset.
Yeah.
But what is logical is whenever possible. And what you're going to find is when you go into an organization, you look at the tech stack, you realize, well, we use 10% of this tool. We use maybe 15% of this one.
Right.
And we don't really need this one. And when was the last time somebody logged in and used it?
Right.
And then the question starts to have a very different conversation path where you say, is it a nice to have or is it a need to have?
Right.
And then the question is, well, and then it's also fun when you talk to the vendors and people who own those tools and you realize, well, they really haven't logged into it. They don't use it on a regular basis,
Mm-hmm.
but it costs the business $40,000-$50,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So is it worth the $40,000-$50,000? Let's say it costs the business $60,000.
Right.
Now the question is, do we get $5,000 worth of productivity out of that from one FTE using it and maintaining it in the course of that month? And I would venture to guess that you usually don't.
Right.
Right. And then the question is, well, what is the offset of that from a business perspective if they didn't have that tool?
Yeah.
But you also have to look at it from a utilization. Well, is it a set and forget, right? Or do they need to go in to use that tool to make sure that their job is efficient? And so if their job is efficient by, 20% more, but they really haven't utilized it in the last 6 months, is
Yeah.
it really efficient?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so unfortunately you get stuck into a way where you have to look at, is it a nice to have or is it a need to have?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that utilization look like? And how do we benefit? Because the worst thing you have is when you get into a situation where you have all these tools, you have to manage it, you have to maintain it, but nobody's really using it.
Yeah. Well, and that gets me to thinking of, that whole debate between, do we want a best-in-class point solution, or do we want an all-in-one solution that is just included in one price, right? So some people say, well, I need this particular thing because it's very specialized with this thing that I do, but this thing that I do is only once every 3 months, right? Whereas this CRM that we have, which is automation, email marketing, social media, it's an all-in-one. It can do a good enough job for you. And so I think that, there might be
Yeah,
some dynamic like that going on as well.
absolutely. And I think, having worked at various organizations where I've gone in and looked at Martech structures. And so as a process engineer, we look at the concept of system dynamics comes to mind, right? You have, and they call it a bathtub metaphor.
But metaphor.
So imagine a bathtub and it's filling in. Well, when you look at that bathtub, it fills in and it fills in with water. But
Right.
now you have to calculate all the other components of it. The faucet that it's dripping into the tub, is it at a trickle? Is it at a heavy flow? How much of that faucet have you turned on? Right? So that's the first part. Your bathtub is a holding bin.
Right.
Now, here's the other part. The drainage, is it big? Is it small? Is it trickling? Because based off of that, if you're filling the tub more at a faster rate than what you're draining, the bathtub will overflow.
Right.
Right? Then you have a capacity issue from the perspective of you have too much coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and which means that you don't have enough going out. But same thing, if if you have too much going out, you can never keep the bathtub full.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So this is the same concept that I look at in terms of the pipeline, but it's also the same concept that I look at in terms of the way that we produce leads and the contact database, right?
Right.
Like your contacts are decaying all the time.
Right.
like we can't tell people don't leave that company. You should stay at that company for the rest of your career,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And we've seen from the Great Resignation 3 years ago, along with the quiet quitting and the quiet firing, that's not true, right? And so as you start to look at those concepts, well, what does that mean in terms of your pipeline and your lead flow, right? If I was to ask you, what is the right number for your CRM in terms of your contact set? Do you keep records that have no activity beyond 3 years, right?
Right.
And some people will say yes, and most people will look at their CRM and say, I have contacts in there from 6 years ago. But the question is, are they still at that company,
Yeah. Most
right?
likely not.
Most likely not.
Yeah.
So then why are we keeping contacts that have no activity,
Mm-hmm.
no show of anything in our CRM, just to keep them for the sake of what? That's the definition of hoarding,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so how many of us are culprits of hoarding our own data in terms of a way that's not conducive to selling or marketing in a clean and efficient way?
Yeah.
And how many of us need data hygiene, right? Data activation, all of these things to drive growth.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting conundrum. I think there's no right answer,
Yeah.
but I can say that throughout the course of my career, I've been fortunate enough to work with some smart people,
Mm-hmm.
people much smarter than me,
Yeah.
who've, helped me shape my views and thinking around those spectrums, especially people within IT who are able to help, people who are, I've hired some great people who are much smarter than me who have been able to help me accomplish those things.
Well, this has been a really stimulating conversation where my how the time has flown. And
Yeah,
there's just one last question I wanted to ask you before we
sure.
sign off here. What do you see are the Martech trends for 2025 for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I mean, everything I hear right now in Martech trend seems to be AI, 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 right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That is definitely a trend. What I would say and urge is as you look at that AI, right? If your data is dirty and
Right.
if your data is cluttered and stupid, right?
Right.
The output's going to be that way as well, right?
Right.
It's also understanding, are you in a closed loop environment? How open is your AI? And also keep in mind, like open AI goes down twice a week,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How do you maintain that stability and sustainability to ensure that your systems are operating at an optimal speed? Because every downtime we have costs the business money,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And so those are the things I'm seeing in terms of trend. I would urge people to learn and get used to it, get familiar with large linguistic models, right? LLM models. Some of the companies that I've been working with on alpha tests have educated me, and made me very intrigued about where that's headed. Um, but like anything, it's more about like learning from each other. I truly believe that that's the newer trend.
Hmm.
And, but then again, like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Google Ads was a new trend. Google Analytics was a new trend, right?
Exactly.
And here we are.
Here we are.
So,
Yeah. Well, David, I just really wanted to say thank you so much for spending this time with us here at Martechify. And I was going to ask you where people could reach you, but I think people could probably reach you at David Sim on LinkedIn,
yep.
right?
Yeah, they
And
can.
and and thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you again sometime in the near future. And to everybody here watching, we will see you in a next episode of Martechify. Again, thank you very much, David, for joining us.
Great. Thank you for having me.